Damascus, 1993. The oldest continuously inhabited city in the world wakes up to the call of prayer echoing off the slopes of Mount Qasioun. The air in the Al-Hamidiyya souk smells of cardamom, roasted coffee, and the heavy, sweet scent of jasmine that gives the city its nickname. To a tourist, it is a place of history and ancient beauty. To the intelligence services of the world, it is a fortress. Beneath the veneer of bustling markets and tea houses lies a network of silence. In 1993, the regime held absolute power, maintained by a security apparatus so pervasive that locals joked the walls didn't just have ears, they had recording devices. The Mukhabarat, the secret police, were everywhere. They were the men in leather jackets sitting quietly in the back of cafes, the taxi drivers asking too many questions, and the shadows lingering in the doorways of the old city. But this story isn't about the visible power of the state. It is about what the state kept hidden. Deep within the Mossad district, inside a nondescript brutalist concrete building known only as the Directorate, there sat a basement archive. It was a room that technically did not exist. Inside were rows of filing cabinets containing the ghost records, the administrative paper trail of thousands of citizens who had been detained and vanished into the regime's prison system. These files were the regime's insurance and its darkest secret. They proved that the disappearances were not accidents, but a mechanized, bureaucratic process. For decades, the world suspected these files existed. Human rights organizations, the UN, and foreign governments all knew the regime kept detailed records. Dictatorships always do. They are obsessed with order, even in their cruelty. But knowing they existed and proving it were two different things. Without the physical files, the regime could deny everything. They could claim it was Western propaganda, lies, and rumors. Israel watched this carefully. While the primary concern of the Mossad was military capability, missiles, tanks, and troop movements, intelligence is a puzzle where every piece matters. The ghost records contained information on captured Israeli navigators, assets who had gone silent, and the inner workings of the Syrian security mindset. More importantly, possessing these files would strip the regime of its diplomatic shield. It would be a strategic weapon more powerful than a bomb, the weapon of undeniable truth. Before we descend into the shadows of Damascus and unlock the vault that was never meant to be opened, if you want to see more investigations into the operations that shaped history, make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. We are peeling back the layers of secrecy that governments fight to keep closed. The decision to go after the files wasn't made lightly. It began with a whisper. A source in Europe, a low-level Syrian diplomat seeking asylum, mentioned a renovation project at the Directorate. He claimed that for a brief window of 72 hours, the archive was being consolidated and moved to a temporary vault in a private villa belonging to General Nabil Hayek, the chief of records. The regime was digitizing, modernizing, and for a split second, the most guarded secrets in the Middle East would be sitting in a residential basement, protected not by an army, but by the arrogance of a general who believed he was untouchable. Mossad's director looked at the intelligence. The risk was astronomical. If an agent were caught, there would be no extraction, no diplomatic immunity, and no mercy. But the reward was the ability to shatter the regime's legitimacy on the global stage. The order was given. The operation was codenamed Paper Trail. The objective was simple: get in, secure the evidence, and get out without leaving a trace that you were ever there. To steal a library of secrets, you don't send a soldier, you send a ghost. The architect of Operation Paper Trail was a man known within the agency simply as Elias. He wasn't a James Bond figure in a tuxedo. He was 45, balding, wore thick-rimmed glasses, and looked like a university professor who had lost his tenure. But Elias possessed a mind that saw security systems not as barriers, but as mathematical equations waiting to be solved. Elias had spent the last decade building legends, fake identities so deep and detailed that they could withstand interrogation by the toughest counterintelligence officers. For this mission, he needed a legend that was boring. In the world of espionage, excitement gets you killed. Boredom makes you invisible. He created Thomas Winter, a Swiss logistics consultant specializing in archival preservation and climate-controlled storage systems. The backstory was meticulous. Winter had a real office in Zurich, a real secretary, who was actually a Mossad employee, and a real paper trail of contracts with museums and libraries across Europe. Elias spent 6 months living as Winter in Europe, attending conferences on humidity control and paper acidity, boring everyone he met with long lectures on the proper storage of bureaucratic records. The entry point into Damascus wouldn't be a parachute jump or a border crossing in the dead of night. It would be a first-class ticket on a commercial flight via Vienna. The regime in Syria was looking for spies, saboteurs, and commandos. They weren't looking for a pedantic Swiss consultant coming to bid on a contract to upgrade the National Museum's air conditioning systems. Elias landed at Damascus International Airport in late October. The humidity hit him the moment the cabin doors opened. He adjusted his glasses, picked up his leather briefcase, and walked toward immigration. This was the first hurdle. The immigration officer was a young man, bored and tired, stamping passports with a rhythmic thud. When Elias handed over the Swiss passport, the officer paused. He flipped through the pages, seeing stamps from Cairo, Amman, and Paris. "Purpose of visit?" the officer asked in Arabic. Elias replied in broken, accented English. "Consultation, National Museum, preservation of, how you say, antiquities." He pulled out a binder of technical schematics for dehumidifiers. "I can show you the specifications of the compressor units if you wish. It is fascinating technology." The officer looked at the binder, looked at Elias's bland, eager face, and waved him through. No spy would be this dull. Elias took a taxi to the Sheraton Damascus, a hub for foreign dignitaries and businessmen. He checked in, went to his room, and immediately swept it for bugs. He found one in the telephone and another behind the mirror. He left them exactly where they were. To disable them would signal he was a professional. Instead, he unpacked his shirts, ordered a club sandwich from room service, and turned on the television to a local channel, letting the noise fill the room. For the next 3 days, Elias was Thomas Winter. He met with museum officials. He measured humidity levels in ancient halls. He complained about the heat. He was the perfect, harmless technician. But every evening, he sat in the hotel lobby, drinking tea and watching. He wasn't watching the museum. He was watching the social circles of the city's elite. He was waiting for the connection that would lead him to General Hayek. General Nabil Hayek was a man of contradictions. As the head of the records division, he was the keeper of the regime's darkest truths. He was feared by the populace, a man who could erase a person's existence with a signature. But in the evenings, Hayek fancied himself a man of culture. He collected rare manuscripts, ancient coins, and Ottoman-era maps. He wanted to be seen not as a jailer, but as a historian. This vanity was his vulnerability. Elias knew from the intelligence dossier that Hayek was paranoid about his personal collection deteriorating. The general didn't trust local contractors with his prized possessions. He wanted European expertise. The contact was made at a reception hosted by the French cultural attaché. Elias had secured an invite through his museum cover. The room was filled with the smoke of expensive cigars and the murmur of diplomatic gossip. Elias stood by a display of historical maps, looking critical. "The lighting is all wrong," Elias muttered, loud enough to be heard by the man standing next to him. "The UV index in this room will fade the ink within 5 years." The man turned. It was Colonel Riyad, General Hayek's aide-de-camp. "You know about preservation?" Riyad asked. Elias adjusted his glasses. "I know that if you treat history like this, you lose it. I am Winter, Zurich Archival Solutions." The bait was taken. Within 20 minutes, Colonel Riyad had introduced Elias to General Hayek. The general was a short, stout man with eyes that never smiled, even when his mouth did. He looked at Elias with suspicion that quickly faded as Elias launched into a passionate, technical critique of the room's humidity. "General," Elias said, "you are a man who understands the value of records. Paper is fragile. History is fragile. Without proper climate control, the past turns to dust." Hayek nodded, his ego stroked. "I have a private collection," the general said softly. "Very rare items. At my villa. The dampness in the basement concerns me." "I could take a look," Elias offered casually. "I am very busy with the National Museum, but for a man of your stature, perhaps I can squeeze in a consultation." 2 days later, a black Mercedes limousine picked Elias up from the Sheraton. He was driven out of the city center, up into the cooler air of the Mossad hills. The general's villa was a fortress disguised as a mansion. High walls, guard towers, and men with Kalashnikovs patrolling the perimeter. But Elias wasn't looking at the guns. He was looking at the wiring, the camera angles, the shift changes. When he was led down to the basement, Elias felt a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature. One half of the basement was a luxurious gallery for the general's private collection. The other half was sealed behind a heavy steel door with a biometric keypad. That was the temporary vault. That was where the ghost records were being stored during the directorate's renovation. "Just the gallery, Mr. Vinter," the general said, noting Elias's glance at the steel door. "That area is restricted, state business." "Of course," Elias said, pulling out his humidity gauge. "I'm only interested in the environment. Although if that room shares ventilation with this one, the moisture transfer could be catastrophic for your manuscripts." He saw the flicker of concern in the general's eyes. The seed was planted. Elias spent an hour measuring the gallery, but his mind was mapping the layout. He noted the thickness of the walls, the type of alarm sensors on the windows, and the fact that the ventilation ducts were oversized, likely to handle the heat of the mainframe computers used for the new digital archive. He left the villa with a promise to draw up a proposal for a climate control system. He had the layout, he had the location. Now he just needed a team to help him rob the most dangerous house in Damascus. Mossad operates on a principle of compartmentalization. Elias was the planner and the inside man, but he couldn't physically move tons of paper or photograph thousands of documents alone. He needed a team, but bringing in a squad of Israeli commandos to the Mossad district was a suicide mission. The team had to be invisible. They had to be locals, or appear to be locals. The agency activated the sleepers. These were not Israelis. They were deep cover assets recruited from within the region over the course of decades. There was Karim, an electrician who worked on the city's power grid. He had been on the payroll for 15 years, waiting for a call that might never come. There was Syria, a woman who worked in a high-end catering company that serviced diplomatic parties. And there was Yusuf, a driver for a taxi fleet. Elias met them individually using rigorous counter-surveillance routes. He met Karim in a noisy tea house in the old city. He met Syria in a park near the university. He met Yusuf in the back of his taxi. None of them knew each other. They only knew Elias as their handler for this specific job. "The target is the Hayek Villa," Elias told Karim. "I need the power to the perimeter sensors to fluctuate, not cut off. That triggers the backup generator and the alarm. I need a brownout, a voltage drop that confuses the system for exactly 4 minutes." Karim nodded, sweat beading on his forehead. "The Mossad grid is old, but it is watched. If I manipulate the substation, they will see it. Make it look like a failure," Elias said. "A rat chewing a wire, a blown transformer. It happens every day in this city. Just make sure it happens at 02 wire on Friday." To Syria, the instructions were different. "General Hayek is hosting a dinner party on Thursday night. You will be supervising the catering staff. I need you to place a device in the ventilation shaft of the basement. It's a repeater. It loops the security camera feed." Syria's hands trembled slightly as she took the small magnetic device wrapped in a napkin. "If they catch me, they won't," Elias assured her. "You are the help. To men like Hayek, you are invisible. Do not look him in the eye. Do your job, place the device, and leave." Yusuf, the driver, had the most dangerous job. "I need transport," Elias said. "Not a taxi. I need a van that looks like a maintenance vehicle for the water company. And I need it to have a false floor." "The checkpoints?" Yusuf asked. "We will have the paperwork," Elias promised. "But you must drive. You know the streets better than anyone." The plan was a complex mechanism of moving parts. A brownout to blind the perimeter sensors, a looped camera feed to blind the guards inside, a maintenance van to move the equipment, which was actually the extraction gear. But there was a problem: the steel door. Elias knew locks, but the biometric keypad on the secure vault was military grade. It required a fingerprint and a code. He couldn't force it open without triggering a silent alarm that would bring the entire mukhabarat down on them in 5 minutes. He needed the code, and he needed the fingerprint. He needed General Hayek to open the door for him. Thursday arrived. The tension in the air was palpable to Elias, though to the rest of the city it was just another humid evening. He returned to the villa in the afternoon to present his proposal for the climate control system. This was the gamble. General Hayek was in a good mood. He was preparing for his dinner party. He led Elias down to the basement gallery again. "Your proposal involves extensive ductwork," Hayek noted, looking at the blueprints Elias had fabricated. "It is necessary," Elias insisted. "But General, I must insist on checking the airflow from the secure room again. My calculations show a pressure differential. If we don't balance it, the moisture from your secure vault will be sucked into the gallery and destroy your manuscripts." Hayek hesitated. Security protocol forbade opening the vault to foreigners. But his vanity, his obsession with his collection, weighed heavily. He looked at the keypad, then at Elias. "It will take only a moment?" Hayek asked. 30 seconds, Elias said, checking his watch. "Just to measure the draft." Hayek stepped to the keypad. Elias stood respectfully back, but his glasses were not ordinary. They were equipped with a polarized filter that highlighted the oils on the keypad. As Hayek punched the code, 491205, Elias memorized the position of the fingers. Then, Hayek pressed his thumb against the scanner. The light turned green. The heavy bolts clanked open. "Stay here," Hayek ordered. He stepped into the vault. Elias moved quickly. He didn't follow him in. Instead, he pulled a clear adhesive film from his pocket. He waited for Hayek to turn his back to inspect a vent. In that split second, Elias stepped forward and pressed the film over the fingerprint scanner, lifting the latent print of the general's thumb. He peeled it off and slid it into his cuff just as Hayek turned around. "You feel the draft?" Elias asked, holding up a wet finger. "I feel nothing," Hayek grunted, stepping out and slamming the door. The auto lock engaged. "It is subtle," Elias said, "but dangerous. We will fix it." Elias left the villa with the code in his head and the general's fingerprint in his pocket. But he had seen something else inside the vault during that brief glimpse. It wasn't just filing cabinets. There were crates, wooden crates marked with the seal of the Ministry of Interior. The archive wasn't just sitting there, it was packed for transport. Elias's blood ran cold. If the files were packed, they might be moved sooner than the 72-hour window suggested. They might be moved tonight. The timeline had just collapsed. They couldn't wait for the weekend. They had to hit the villa tonight, during the dinner party, while the house was full of guests. It was madness. It was the only option. He activated the emergency signal. Karim, Soraya, and Yusuf received the page. The operation was live. Night fell over Damascus. The Mossad district lit up, the villas of the elite glowing like islands in the darkness. General Hayek's home was bustling. Luxury cars filled the driveway. Waiters circulated with trays of drinks. In the kitchen, Soraya was managing the chaos, her heart pounding against her ribs. She had the device in her apron pocket. Elias, dressed in black fatigues now, sat in the back of Yusuf's van, parked 3 streets away. They were posing as a water main repair crew, complete with flashing yellow lights and barricades. It was the perfect urban camouflage. No one questions a crew digging up a road in the middle of the night. They just complain about the noise and drive around. Karim is in position at the substation, Elias whispered into his radio. "Soraya, status?" "I am heading to the basement to restock the bar." Soraya's voice came back, tiny and trembling in his earpiece. "The guards are distracted. There is a lot of celebration." "Do it now," Elias commanded. Inside the villa, Soraya carried a crate of soda bottles down the back stairs. The hallway to the basement was guarded by a soldier, but he was busy flirting with one of the other maids. Soraya slipped past them, into the utility room where the main ventilation shaft was accessible. She used a butter knife to pry open the grate. It was tight. She pushed the magnetic repeater inside, counting the seconds. 1, 2, 3. It clicked into place. She replaced the grate and walked out, her face a mask of calm. "Camera feed is looped," Elias confirmed, checking a small monitor in the van. The image of the basement hallway was now frozen on a 10-second loop of an empty corridor. The real corridor could be full of people, and the control room would never know. "Karim, initiate the brownout." Blocks away, Karim threw a heavy switch at the substation. Sparks showered down, and a low hum turned into a groan of dying machinery. The lights in the entire neighborhood flickered, dimmed, and then surged. At the Hayek villa, the perimeter lights died. The sensors went offline. The backup generator kicked in with a roar, but for those crucial 90 seconds between the grid failure and the generator stabilizing, the electronic eyes of the villa were blind. "Go," Elias said. He and two other operatives, men who had arrived in the false bottom of the van, slipped out. They didn't go for the gate. They went for the neighbor's wall, vaulting over it with silent precision, landing in the general's garden. They moved through the shadows of the cypress trees, avoiding the roving patrols who were now shouting into their radios about the power cut. They reached the side entrance to the basement, a delivery ramp used for the kitchen. Syria had left it unlatched. They slipped inside, the air cool and smelling of expensive perfume from the party above. They were in. They reached the steel door. The guard station at the end of the hall was empty. The guard had gone upstairs to check on the power outage. Elias approached the keypad. He typed the code, 491205. Then, he took the synthetic fingerprint he had fabricated from the lift in the hotel room, a piece of latex molded to the general's whorls, and pressed it to the scanner. A red light blinked. Failed. Elias froze. Sweat stung his eyes. Again. He whispered. He wiped the scanner and pressed the latex harder. Green light. The bolt retracted with a heavy clunk that sounded like a gunshot in the silence. Elias pushed the door open. They were inside the vault. Floor-to-ceiling shelves were packed with manila folders, but the crates were in the center of the room. Elias opened one. Inside were not just papers, but microfilm reels. Thousands of them. This was it. The entire history of the regime's shadow war against its own people. "We can't carry the crates," Elias hissed. "Too heavy." "We take the microfilm. We fill the bags." The operatives began to work, frantic but methodical. They cracked open the crates, dumping reels of film into waterproof duffel bags. It was a race against time. The power was stabilizing. The guard would return. Suddenly, Elias's earpiece crackled. It was Syria. "General Hayek is coming down. He wants to show a guest his collection. He is on the stairs. You have 30 seconds. 30 seconds. They were trapped in a steel box with no other exit, and the man who owned the secrets was walking toward the door. The air inside the steel vault felt rapidly devoid of oxygen, though the ventilation hummed steadily. Elias stood motionless, his hand hovering over the handle of a duffel bag stuffed with microfilm reels. On the other side of the 3-inch steel door, the heavy, muffled footsteps of General Hayek grew louder. "The manuscript is from the 12th century. Hayek's voice boomed, distorted by the metal but unmistakable. "I keep it in the climate-controlled section. You must see the calligraphy." He was bringing the guest to the vault, not the gallery, the vault. The arrogance of the man knew no bounds. He treated state secrets as personal curiosities to impress his friends. Elias looked at his two operatives. They were statues, their eyes wide, weapons drawn but pointed at the floor. A firefight here would be a disaster. It would turn an intelligence coup into a diplomatic massacre. Elias pressed a finger to his lips. He looked at the electronic lock mechanism on the inside of the door. There was no way to jam it without damaging it, and damage was evidence. Outside in the corridor, Hayek punched in the code. Beep, beep, beep. Inside, the red light on the lock housing turned amber. The bolt mechanism began to cycle. "Syria," Elias whispered into his comms, his voice barely a breath. "Now, whatever you have. Now." Upstairs in the main dining hall, Syria was standing near the buffet table, holding a silver tray laden with crystal decanters of vintage whiskey. Hayek's most prized liquor, smuggled in from Lebanon. She saw the general's wife signaling for a refill. Syria took a step, locked her eyes on the marble pillar near the stairs leading down to the basement, and deliberately tripped. She didn't just fall, she launched the tray. The crystal decanters hit the marble floor at the top of the stairs with the force of a fragmentation grenade. The sound was explosive, shattering glass, splashing liquid, and the heavy clang of silver hitting stone. It echoed down the stairwell like a gunshot. "Ya Allah!" Syria screamed, adding a melodramatic wail of pain. Down in the basement hallway, General Hayek froze, his finger inches from the biometric scanner. The crash was followed by the screams of his wife. "My whiskey!" Hayek roared, the collector in him overriding the jailer. "The Baccarat crystal!" He spun around, abandoning the vault door just as the final locking pin was about to retract. "Stay here," he barked at his guest. "Idiot servants!" The general thundered up the stairs, his footsteps retreating. The guest, left alone in the hallway, hesitated. He was a politician, not a soldier. He felt awkward standing in the basement. He turned and walked back toward the gallery, away from the steel door. Inside, Elias exhaled, his lungs burning. The amber light on the lock turned back to red. The bolt re-engaged. "Move," Elias hissed. "We have maybe 2 minutes before he stops yelling and remembers he left a guest alone." They hauled the bags. The exit was the same way they came, through the delivery ramp. They moved like shadows, slipping out of the vault and closing the heavy door. Elias took a split second to wipe the keypad with a chemically treated cloth that dissolved the latex residue and his own oils. They sprinted through the garden, the heavy bags cutting into their shoulders. The power was back on, the perimeter lights buzzing to life. They reached the wall just as the first beam of a searchlight swept the lawn. One by one, they vaulted over, landing in the dirt of the alleyway where Yusuf's van was idling. The side door slid open. They threw the bags into the false floor, jumped in, and Yusuf slammed on the gas. As they turned the corner, the lights of the villa blazed fully to life behind them. They were out, but they were still in the heart of the beast. The van merged into the traffic of Medze Highway. Yusuf drove with the steady, boring pace of a municipal worker at the end of a long shift. Elias sat in the back, stripping off his black fatigues to reveal the civilian clothes underneath. He checked the bags. 3,000 reals, the names of prisoners, the locations of black sites, the orders signed by the president himself. It was radioactive. "Karim is clear," the radio chirped. "He is back at his station. Soraya is leaving the villa now. She was fired for the broken crystal. She is walking to the extraction point." "Good," Elias said. "Burn the comms, all of them. From this moment, we are ghosts. No radio, no signals." He gathered the earpieces and radios from the team, placed them in a bag with a thermite charge, and waited. They needed to separate. The van was a target. Yusuf pulled into a dark industrial lot in the Kadam district. The team worked in silence. They transferred the duffel bags from the van to the trunk of a beat-up 1980 Peugeot sedan, the most common car in Syria. "Yusuf, take the van to the scrapyard in Homs. Burn it," Elias ordered. "You two," he pointed to the operatives, "take the Peugeot. The route is Green 1. Do not stop for anything." "And you?" one of the operatives asked. "I have a flight to catch," Elias said, adjusting his glasses. He was becoming Thomas Winter again. A Swiss consultant does not disappear in the middle of the night. It looks suspicious. "I go back to the hotel. I sleep. I leave in the morning." It was the most dangerous part of the plan. To flee immediately would signal guilt. To stay required nerves of steel. Elias took a taxi back to the Sheraton. He walked past the front desk, nodded to the concierge, and went to his room. He lay on the bed, staring at the ceiling. His heart was hammering a frantic rhythm against his ribs, but his face was stone. He had to wait for 7 hours. 7 hours while the general might return to the vault. 7 hours while the theft might be discovered. At 06 Naz, the sun rose. Elias showered, dressed in his suit, and packed his bag. He went down to the lobby, checked out, and ordered a coffee. He sipped it slowly, watching the door. Every time it opened, he expected the mukhabarat. But the door only admitted tired businessmen and tourists. The theft hadn't been discovered yet. The general had likely been too angry about his whiskey to check the vault again. Elias took a taxi to the airport. Damascus International Airport is a study in paranoia. Every passenger is scrutinized. As Elias stood in the line for passport control, he held his breath. If the alarm had been raised, his name, Thomas Winter, would be on the screen. The glass booth ahead was the only thing standing between him and freedom. He stepped up. The officer took his passport. He swiped it. He frowned at the screen. Elias gripped the handle of his briefcase. Inside was nothing incriminating, just contracts and humidity readings. The microfilm was in the Peugeot, heading north. "Mr. Vinter," the officer said. "You are leaving early? Your visa is for 2 weeks. Emergency at the head office in Zurich," Elias lied smoothly. "A pipe burst in the archives. Water damage. I must return immediately." The officer stared at him. It was a stare designed to break people. Elias held it, projecting the annoyance of a businessman inconvenienced by incompetent plumbing. Stamp. "Safe travels," the officer said, handing the passport back. Elias walked through the gate. He didn't run. He didn't look back. He boarded the Austrian Airlines flight to Vienna. As the plane taxied, he looked out the window at the hangars. He knew something the pilot didn't. The airspace was about to be closed. Minutes after the wheels retracted and the plane banked over the Mediterranean, a phone rang on General Hayek's desk. It was his morning archivist. "General." The voice was trembling. "The vault, the crates, they are empty." By the time Elias landed in Vienna, Damascus was in lockdown. General Hayek had ordered the airport closed, the borders sealed, and roadblocks established on every major artery leaving the capital. But he was too late for Elias, and he was looking for the wrong thing. He was looking for a team of commandos. He wasn't looking for a beat-up Peugeot driven by 2 men who looked like farmers. The Peugeot, carrying the ghost records, was navigating the coastal highway toward Latakia. This was the backup plan. The original plan had been a border crossing into Jordan, but Elias had anticipated the southern routes would be the first to close. The north was looser, wilder. But as they approached the port city of Latakia, the radio in the Peugeot crackled with state broadcasts. "Security alert. All vehicles subject to search. Report suspicious activity." The driver, an operative known as Gadi, looked at the rearview mirror. A military jeep was approaching fast, lights flashing. "They know," Gadi said. "They don't know us," the passenger, Ronnie, replied. "They are fishing. Keep your speed." The jeep pulled alongside them. The soldier in the passenger seat waved them over. Gadi pulled to the shoulder. This was it. The trunk was full of the regime's death warrants. The soldier walked up, hand on his holster. He looked young, conscripted, and angry. "ID," he snapped. Gadi handed over a Syrian ID card. It identified him as a vegetable wholesaler. The trunk, however, didn't smell like vegetables. "Open the trunk," the soldier ordered. Ronnie shifted in his seat, his hand dropping to the concealed pistol between his legs. This was the nightmare scenario, a shootout on a public highway. Gadi popped the trunk. The soldier looked inside. He saw duffel bags. "What is this?" "Laundry," Gadi said, his voice bored. "We service the hotels in Latakia, the sheets, the uniforms. We are late." The soldier poked one of the bags. It was soft, packed with clothes on top of the microfilm reels. He hesitated. He could unzip it. If he unzipped it, he would see the reels. If he saw the reels, he would die, and the mission would fail. The soldier looked at the heat shimmering off the asphalt. He looked at the line of cars building up behind them. He looked at Gadi's tired face. "Go." He waved them off. "Fix your taillight." Gadi didn't wait. He merged back onto the road. They didn't speak for 10 kilometers. Latakia was not the final destination. The port was too heavily guarded. The target was a small fishing cove 10 miles north, near the Turkish border. This was Smuggler's Cove, a place where for centuries goods had moved between the Levant and Anatolia without paying taxes. Night had fallen again. The Peugeot pulled onto a dirt track and stopped near a cluster of rocks. Gadi and Ronnie killed the engine. They waited. Out at sea, the water was black and restless. They were looking for a signal, a single red flash. Mossad had arranged for a specialized extraction. Not a submarine. Too risky in shallow waters. They had contracted a team of Shayatet 13 naval commandos using Zodiac rigid inflatable boats, launching from a mother ship in international waters. At 02 Rouse, the red flash appeared. Gadi and Ronnie hauled the bags down to the waterline. The surf was rough. The Zodiac appeared out of the darkness like a sea monster, its engine murmuring with a suppressed, low-frequency purr. 4 men in wetsuits jumped out. No words were exchanged. They grabbed the bags and tossed them into the boat. Gotti and Ronnie followed. As the boat turned and gunned its engines, heading out into the open Mediterranean, headlights appeared on the cliff above them. A Syrian coastal patrol. A spotlight swept the water. It caught the wake of the Zodiac. Crack, crack, crack. Machine gun fire erupted from the cliff, tracer rounds zipping through the darkness, hissing as they hit the water. The commandos didn't return fire. Speed was their armor. The pilot pushed the throttle to the stops. The Zodiac leaped over the swells, slamming hard, the spray soaking the bags of microfilm. The tracers fell behind them. The lights of the Syrian coast faded into a thin line. They were in international waters. They were safe. Tel Aviv, 2 weeks later. The basement of the Mossad headquarters was buzzing. The microfilm had been processed, digitized, and translated. Elias stood in the briefing room. On the wall were projected images from the files. They were worse than anyone had imagined. They weren't just names, they were systems. The files detailed the command structure of the torture program, the specific orders for disappearances, and the receipts for the equipment used in interrogation rooms. But the most damning file was a memo signed by General Hayek himself, authorizing the detention of student protesters who were never seen again. It was the smoking gun. The question now was what to do with it. Intelligence is usually kept secret, used for leverage. But the director made a different call. This wasn't just intelligence, it was history. "We leak it," the director said. "Not all at once. We drip it out. We give it to The Hague. We give it to the UN. We give it to the press." The release of the Damascus files hit the world like a shockwave. Front-page headlines in Paris, London, and New York displayed the scanned documents. The Syrian regime denied it, of course. They called them forgeries, Zionist lies, Western fabrications. But the detail was too precise. The handwriting was verified. The dates matched known disappearances. The diplomatic shield of the regime was shattered. Ambassadors were recalled. Sanctions were tightened. The world could no longer pretend they didn't know. In Damascus, the fallout was brutal. General Nabil Hayek was not fired. He simply ceased to exist. One morning, his driver arrived at the villa, but the general was gone. Rumors swirled that he had been taken to one of his own prisons, a victim of the very system he had meticulously documented. Elias retired from field work shortly after. He went back to his real life, to his small apartment and his books. He never spoke of Thomas Venter or the humidity of the Mossad district, but sometimes when he watched the news and saw the diplomats arguing over the fate of the Middle East, he would smile. He knew that while armies fight for land, the real war is fought for the truth. And in the dark of a Damascus basement, with a broken tray of crystal and a fake fingerprint, they had stolen the truth from the devil himself. The torture files didn't stop the war. They didn't topple the regime overnight. But they stripped away the shadows. They ensured that when history was written, there would be no ambiguity, no denial, and no forgetting. The victims had been ghosts, but now, thanks to a Swiss consultant who didn't exist, they had names. And in the world of intelligence, proving something exists is the most powerful act of all.